What is going on, everybody? Bobby Fi with my guy Brandon Cruz. We are going to be talking through the showdown slate between Buffalo and Miami. We obviously have things we're waiting on, none of which is more important than whether Devon Achane will play. And there's a lot of stuff to question. But first of all, I want to say it's great to be doing a show with you again, Brandon. It's been a while. How you been? And yeah, tell the people what's going on.
It has. It's been quite a long time since like NBA season. Just
Yeah.
been doing the NASCAR content and well, first off, been traveling. I was in Atlanta for the NASCAR race this last weekend, so I completely basically just missed week 1 of the NFL.
Yeah.
You know. But outside of that, it's been pretty good.
I would say good for you, but I actually had my showdown on Sunday night brought me back ahead. But it was a rough Sunday slate, but it was a very frustrating. I actually am glad we didn't do a showdown show that night because I would have been like more invested in every single thing. I didn't realize
Mhm.
that I might have been I might have had a chance to chop everything like three ways for a ton of money. But if there was one ball Jameson Williams hauled it at the very end, but
Mhm.
so be it. So yeah, so I guess just like talking about obviously Brandon does all the NASCAR stuff for us and does a great job. And hopefully you guys are checking all that stuff out. We do have a NASCAR package for $30 a month. We also have all of our other packages, and for all the other packages, you can get the NFL 24 for 24% off your first month, and NFL yearly for 10% off your yearly package. It's an awesome deal. We're using, we're partnered with SaberSim and love the company like crazy, and we're just charging a tiny bit more than they are. It's very very close, but do have to get those things in at the beginning to remind people to come join us. But Brandon, I guess overall thoughts on the slate. I'm going to pull up my screen here, and I want to sort of just get your overall thoughts on these types of slates. It's assuming that Achane plays is all we can do. I think right now it's a little bit early, but at the moment, assuming he plays, how are you looking at the captain in this? What is your overall strategy? You're very comfortable just locking players in when you feel like it. You're very comfortable locking in captains, even if they're going to be popular. You just decide it's your thing. Is there anybody you're going to lock in? What's your sort of overall take on slate captain? Who you're into? What's going on?
So this slate is a pretty difficult one because typically we run into a situation to where both teams usually aren't spreading the ball out nearly as much as both individual teams here, as where like with Miami, not only do you have the running game regardless if Ainchett is playing, but you have Waddle and Hill who pretty much have pretty similar upside in terms of what their floor and ceiling can be. I mean, neither one of these guys can easily score 22 on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you look at the last week or the last game that they had last time, like sure, you know, Tyreek scored nearly 30, Waddle did nearly 20. Like that's kind of what you're going to expect from either one of those guys. Um, the fact that Miami doesn't have Mostert uh, makes the Achan versus Wilson versus the other fellow at $2,000 like really doesn't matter. Like I would actually prefer if Achan plays just because then it at least doesn't just lock in Wilson as like a captain position as we saw on Monday with Mason. As like the only thing I said in the Discord because I was driving back was like I'll just play Mason captain and then just
Yeah.
play the highest protected guy. That was all I said on the drive home on Monday. So hopefully we don't run into a situation like that. And then when we look at Buffalo, which is a team that I played very heavily last year in like any showdown or anything that happened. And the one thing you can normally do with Buffalo to like cheat the system or like the cheese is to play Josh Allen and captain and then just stack the Buffalo Bills players and like basically just fade the number one wide receiver who was like Diggs last year. Okay, you really can't do that this year because they're spreading the ball out like wildly. Like this is almost like Patrick Mahomes in terms of like who's getting targets. Like Cook is getting targets. Kincaid didn't have nearly as big of a role as we expect him to have coming off of last year's game. I mean, I think he's just due for like positive regression like by default today. Like I would assume he's probably going to score like near 10 or 15 points. But even Shakir, Coleman, like none of these wide receivers are like truly wide receiver one like material. Like these guys are very much similar in their skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when we're looking at this slate, for me, the reason why it's so difficult is usually you can pinpoint who you want to target, who you want in the captain. For me, the main thing I'm looking at is the three guys that I probably want to try and make sure I have in most, if not all, of my lineups would be Josh Allen, Hill, and probably Waddle. The reason being is because it's very unlikely. Like even Tua basically did, and I'll let you talk after this, Bobby.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
But
course.
like Tua basically had like the best game that he can really have, truly. And him scoring 21 points by, price per dollar range, like just saying, like if the salary they had this week was related to last week in terms of like a showdown stuff, like Tua would have been the worst point per dollar play between the three guys.
Right.
Because you needed Tyreek, you needed Waddle. That's typically how it goes. And usually when you have a quarterback that has like the two best, like, or two-star, like, wide receivers, to where the rest of the offense is not even being used in the air game. Like it's the Dolphins are running the ball with like the 3 running backs, or they're only throwing to Waddle and Hill. Like they're not throwing to Smythe. They're not throwing to like really anybody else. And so like when I look at this slate here, I want Josh Allen because he's most likely going to take the goal line carries away from Cook. I want Tyreek and I want Waddle because especially if Achane is limited in any form or fashion, or if he just doesn't play, yeah, sure, Wilson becomes a great play, but like I think that just defaults to Tyreek and Waddle being the main focus of the offense. And so for me, Allen, Hill, and Waddle are the 3 guys that I'm focusing on, and I'm probably not going to be able to get Allen in the captain position. And so when I start looking at like builds, that starts leaning towards someone like Shakir, someone like Kincaid, Kincaid is probably the guy that I'm most interested in today in the captain position. But that's like those are pretty much my view on this slate. I like Cook, honestly, but I don't think I'll be able to get to him. I think Cook will probably end up scoring like 13 points, just very similar to what he did last game. But I really want to try and lock in what Allen, Tyreek, and Waddle can bring to the slate. And then, like, I mean, we're kind of just being forced to play Jeff Wilson regardless. Second, running back on the roster at the moment, like at 2,400, like you could just kind of have to play him by default.
So yeah. I want to touch on some of this stuff because you're making a lot of really good points, and I like what you're saying, even though we have a slightly different take on certain things. One, so Wilson automatically, I like Wilson anyway. I'll captain him whether or not Achane plays. Obviously, if Achane doesn't play, we're going to be captaining him, and then we're going to be getting creative and playing Wright as a captain. I've heard good things about Wright. Why can't, and let me just sort of paint a picture from this time last year. We had Mostert and Wilson both coming from San Francisco over to Miami, previously. And they had both shown tremendous upside. Mostert's one of the fastest guys around. Mostert led the league in touchdowns last year. I don't know if many people remember that as a running back. Why can't the situation with Wright, he's got some burst. He was the 4th round pick this year. Why can't he not saying he's going to be Achane. I'm saying like, what are we totally sure that he doesn't have a few burst plays that he becomes the backup running back by the end of the game? That's where I'm looking at it. I think he's going to be actually much like even in the, what's he projected for right now in the, let's see, where are we at? Right. So he's projected at 4% in the flex ownership. And Goldie's got him at 8. I think 8 is a better bet. The thing is, because people aren't going to necessarily want to play, they're going to, you're not going to want to play him with Wilson, with Achane playing, unless you just fade Achane and hope that maybe he is just going to be limited, or maybe that, hey, you don't want to bet on an injury, but if a guy's already banged up, they're going to be careful with him on a Thursday after a Sunday game to start the season, who's got that much talent. Certainly possible. But I'm saying Wright over Wilson in certain lineups. Now, obviously, I'm going to end up with more Wilson than Wright, but I'm way overweight Wright. I have Wright as my captain in lineups. I've got Wright as and look, I know those might seem like F around lineups, but there's no reason we have to assume on week 2 that a 4th round pick from this year won't supplant somewhat of a journeyman who's, by the way, been a great one and shown upside in the past. But why couldn't that happen on a night like tonight, especially against a team like the Bills who've had trouble stopping the run over the years? So I actually like the idea of trying to use him. And I do think Achane's going to play. I love D Pope, but I got to say one thing about D Pope in the chat. If we think someone's not playing, we have to say, I think this person's going to, or I think this person's going to play. Because last week we had a lot of people saying, oh yeah, McCaffrey's playing, including myself in Sheets. But of course, then we get news right after we're done, no McCaffrey. So we have to explore all possibilities, even though it's really hard to do without knowing this one big piece. Anyway, I just wanted to make the case, and because I've talked myself into this a little bit, and I do think it's an interesting way to try to, really take down these tournaments. If you played Achane and whatever, it was Sunday games, but like on any of those early weeks, nobody thought this. There was no thought about him. He wasn't even a person to people. Yeah, there was reports that he ran fast in camp. There's always that with a million players. Now you have a 4th round pick from this year. I'm just saying it's possible. By the end of the day, he might end up being the RB2, which means he's going to get a lot of work because they're not going to make A-Chain an every down back ever. That's just not going to be his role. It would be stupid of them to. You're wasting those incredible opportunities. Now, he might play a lot of those downs, but he's not going to be pounding at the line every time. He's going to be lining up as a wideout. And in that case, you're already probably going to have situations where Wilson and him, or potentially, as I'm hypothesizing, Wright in him. I think it's possible. I think it's enough possibility to try to get way over the field on a play like Wright to me. I also understood what you were saying before, but I want to throw in that I happen to like Cook maybe a little bit better than you do. I do think if there was one guy to lock in, it would be Josh Allen tonight, like without a doubt. But I do happen to like Cook, and I do think Keon Coleman has #1 receiver skill set abilities. It's just a second game in the NFL. Like, it's hard to know what that means. And like you said, they're spreading it out. They're going to have to spread it out. And the problem is this happens to be one of the worst matchups for tight ends in football because Kincaid is the logical choice. Now, what they may do is line up Kincaid on the outside a number of times and get him involved that way. But it's not going to work from a football perspective with him. Like, just in general, Miami's good at blocking the middle of the field. That's what they do a good job covering. It's literally last week, everybody wanted to play Evan Ingram and see how that works out. That Miami is going to be very, very good over the middle. Dude, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, Depot, by the way, that he is going to play. I just want to point out that if we say someone is doing something, we get held accountable afterwards, even if we type it in Discord, no, by the way, take this person out, this person's out or whatever. We do have to just say, like, if we think someone's playing, say, I'm sure he's going to play, but not like he is playing unless it's official. Because if somebody sees he is playing, they tend to think, if I see that written down on there, that means he's already reporting that they're playing. And just want to throw that out there. How much is the real question? I do think he'll play. I'd be very surprised if they don't play him at all. And even, by the way, even if he wasn't going to play at all, why would you say he's not? Why wouldn't you say he's active? You still have 2 other backup running backs. I'm still 2 other running backs. I would do that just to mess with the other team, if nothing else, and line him up as a decoy 5 times and whatever. There's no reason not to do that. Anyway, I sort of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I like the Waddle idea as I thought it would be more contrarian as captain, but because of his price, his price is even high, but I still think people are going to go to it. I am going to just basically, in all my bigger buy-in stuff, Tyreek and Josh Allen are going to be in the flex and basically all. I don't think I'm captaining either of them currently in my biggest buy-in, mostly because I'm trying to get different. The other part of it is I wouldn't be surprised to see A-Chain have a huge game, even on limited, even if he's limited a little bit, he could get there with 12 touches. I kind of like Cook as an option for captain, and I am going to do the Jeff Wilson / Wright captain thing, and no one's going to talk me out of it. I also am going to do some Keon Coleman. But my main captains, when I look at it, I'm looking at my exposure from my builds. I still have Josh Allen and Tyreek the most, followed by Wilson that have almost 20%. And that's assuming A-Chain's in. By the way, he's also he's the captain in my biggest buy-in. So he's actually in 40% of 50% of my entries as captain. And then I got to Cook, A-Chain, Waddle, Coleman, Wright, Tua. I don't even know if I need that one with Tua, but I did want to make sure I had one at least with Wright in my builds, because I built 4 by hand, and 2 of them have Wright as captain in them. But partly it's just waiting on to see just in case A-Chain is. It looks like he's not on the inactive list, so we don't know what that means. But yeah, let's pretend he's a little bit limited. I want exposure to both these backup running. I'm always looking for an angle to get different. Both of these other running backs make sense. I also like, for what it's worth in this game, I like the under. I think both defenses are in play, to answer a question that we got asked a little while ago. Where do you stand with defenses and kickers on a slate like this? Because, like we said, we don't really know who it's going to be for Buffalo. At the same time, Josh Allen put up 700 fantasy points last week with nobody doing anything around him.
I do want to go back to just Wright and Wilson really fast. So I don't know ball in terms of this. This is just me. Wilson is highest projected across the board on the industry. They are pretty much the identical play. They should be the cheapest guy in your lineup if you need, if you can't afford Wilson at 2,400 in the flex, you're playing right. Like that's my view there. So like that's that's really more of a lineup, like what you need in your lineup if you need the salary. I mean, kickers and defenses are always in play. I mean, we just saw it on Monday, which I think people should just be playing more kickers in general, especially with how bad teams usually are, or how bad teams usually are to start the season.
Yep.
Typically, like they're gonna, especially when all teams are still viable in terms of making the playoffs and stuff. Once you get into a situation where you need like 3-4 wins, then you start like playing like a bunch of lunatics just trying to score stuff. But early in the season, they're gonna take the 3 points every time.
Yep.
And I would envision we're probably going to see probably 4 to 5, 3-pointer kicks in this game alone, not including any like extra points that these guys take. And so honestly, I mean, just in my head, I mean, Bass and Sanders probably have a projection of like 8.5, which is either on par or slightly above what Wilson is at, and then probably higher than anybody else in their salary range. And so like kickers are always in play for me. I just struggle to get the defenses. Like I've always struggled playing like defenses in Showdown. I can never figure them out. But if you are playing, like for me, as I said, I like Kincaid and Shakir, or one of the cheaper like Buffalo receivers. But if you're playing Allen, Waddle, or Hill, in the captain, or even like Tua stuff as well, I think you probably want to play, one, if not probably both kickers, because you're going to be in that 4K range anyway. I would probably just, at least for me, I know you said you're basically locking in Allen and Hill in the flex. Are you getting to many kickers in those constructions? Because I would imagine you probably aren't, but I'm curious what you're getting in there.
A little bit of kickers, for whatever reason, slightly more of Bass, I believe. Even though it's interesting, I like Buffalo. I mean, sorry, I like Miami in this game. I like Miami minus the points. I like the under in this game. I'm going to play that angle. I think Buffalo is going to have a much harder time. I think they're much worse than everybody thinks they are. And I honestly don't even know where I feel about Miami when it comes to like, playoff type teams. I just wanted to throw that out there. I actually think the more interesting play based on the ownership, I do think their kickers are always too low owned. And we saw that, I mean, that was a real ceiling game from, on Monday from, I can't even remember his name at the top of my head.
From Moody.
Moody, thank you. But I don't mind that. I do think teams like Miami and Buffalo tend to go fourth and short a little bit more than most people do. That's one argument against them. However, I would also say, you have a 3K Miami defense against the guy who turns the ball over more than anybody in the NFL, and Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an interesting spot. And look, there's also speed all over the special teams there. There's definitely a chance to run one back at some point. There's definitely a chance Josh Allen's going to have like 3 or 4 sacks on a normal game, because some of them are going to be like almost designed semi-runs. You know what I mean? Like they're going to be option type-ish plays, and Allen will try and run out, and then boom, you have a 1-yard loss for a sack. So you're going to get some points from that Miami defense. So I slightly prefer the Miami over the Buffalo defense. But in my builds for the large field, I ended up sort of near the field, but I hand put in Miami in one of my higher buy-ins. I hand put in Tyler Bass. I have one Jason Saunders too, and those are not high buy-ins, but that's above the just the lottery builds and stuff. But I actually think I'd like to, I'm still waiting to rerun everything until we find out 100% about A-Chain, even though it looks like he's not on the inactive list. It looks like he's going to play. He's active, so we got to assume he's at least available. I love the speculation so much on these 2 cheap running backs. That's what's keeping me a little bit lower on these the Buffalo and the Miami side. And I'm telling you right now, and I was wrong. I mean, I wasn't even wrong on Monday. I just said, look, I would get some if you're going to play. If we're going to just assume, which ended up working out great for the San Fran running back. But why not take a shot on the first round kid there too? They're probably not going to do it in the first game of the season, but you should have some exposure to these other potential situations. And we should also look at that. Look, Jeff Wilson may very well be out there to start the game, and they bring A-Chain in his normal role. That's completely possible. It's unlikely for it to be Wright in that role, but I'm telling you, if Wright breaks a couple plays, I'm not saying he's going to be the next A-Chain. You don't need that though. You just need 10 fantasy points from him when what's his name gets 6, Jeff Wilson, or 4 or something like that. That's the route that I'm sort of looking at as a way to get unusual. I'm also very comfortable leaving money on the table tonight. It's weird because I'm not locking in, but I'm basically playing in most lineups the 2 highest priced players. But I just found that like between, we could use Coleman or whatever as an example, just taking the wide receiver position for Buffalo. There's no reason why, like literally, it's completely possible that freaking, that's a little unlikely. I'm trying to think of somebody who's actually got a chance to get there. I was trying to think it was getting a little too creative with it. But I would say that Matt Collins, like, okay, this ownership is too low for 1,600 on this type of slate. That's part, again, why I keep staying off the kickers. I like Matt Collins. I think you could make an argument for taking a shot on him as captain. He got a touchdown last week. He's 1,600. And if you can play him and get everybody else in, it's going to be a low-owned build. Now, whoever you do build with, though, you're going to run into the issue of, oh, we have the same builds. Anybody, the 0.5% that play Matt Collins will have 2 different variations of that exact Matt Collins build. So it makes it very hard to get unique. However, you get the weird, Alan Lazard type of game with 2 touchdowns. It's on the table. And Matt Collins at least has some familiarity. They love him in Buffalo. So certainly in the flex for Matt Collins, but I even think you could argue in certain lineups, you hope it's the 2 Matt Collins touchdown game, and he ends up with like 14 or 15 fantasy points, but everybody else ends up with that, 25 to 30, the other high guys in the 20 to 35 range. That could end up being the best lineup with him in there because he saves you. I just want to throw out some of those other plays that I liked a little bit. And on a lesser scale, you could make a similar argument for MVS. But I think it's less likely than Matt Collins. It's very interesting, though, to look at these ownership. All the Bills receivers look combined. Okay, 30%, 34%, 42%. Like, it's pretty wild. And then you have like what's going to end up being 130% combined between the Miami receivers. It's just kind of weird to see. I'm not used to that for a guy who's going to, the highest projected player is the quarterback for that team. So I do think taking a shot on the other receivers, the backup running backs, that's probably my best way uniquely to try to get different here. Go ahead, Brandon.
So I think another aspect that we need to talk about on this slate, on top of, the slate's different with the 2 teams or whatever, the floor of the salary is very, very low here. Ideally, which we'll see later in the season, stuff is priced soccer casuals and stuff. But I actually really, really hate situations like Monday, even games like this, when the second, even third or fourth string running backs aren't priced higher than 24 and 22. They should just be by default. They should be like 4,800. So we don't have situations to where, we lose, one or like the first or secondary running back on a team, and then you're like defaulted to go to these, value ranges. And same thing with like the Dolphins being at 3K as well. The fact that you have the 2 running backs, the Dolphins defense, like realistically, Dolphins probably score you 4 points straight up today. Anything more than that, you'll be happy with. But 4 points from a 3K, defense is pretty huge here. That goes back to whenever the salary, at least like in NASCAR and stuff as well. Whenever the salary is pretty low at the bottom, that usually allows you, and you probably should, really end up chasing the higher, more expensive guys. Kind of going back to Allen and Tyreek Hill, I think those 2 are the best plays on the slate, and you just move on from there. But at least for me, a lot of higher projected lineups with like 2 to 3 points are going to have either like Josh Allen or Tua in the captain position. Whereas when you start looking at projected points that are like 2, 3, maybe 4 lower than that. Oh, also, like the Allen Tua ones typically have a kicker in there. I don't think you need that 4K range today with how low the rest of the salary is. Because
that's a really good point. And I guess that's sort of why my builds, with all the sims and everything weren't getting me to as much of those other 4K and 3K plays, even though I liked each of them on their own in a vacuum. Doesn't mean that it's the right slate for it, because look, one thing we did see though is the San Francisco running, he was completely under-owned. He was 56% in the flex, 56% overall. And what was he? 15% as a captain.
I think he's like 14, which was just stupid. That was stupid.
It's crazy.
Like that. That's not even a projection play. Like everybody's like, oh, he blew up. He was the best guy. He at that point, like him at that price range, he works if he scores 8 points on DFS
Right.
for a price per dollar. Like, that's just so stupid. I don't understand why people didn't play him more in the captain. That blew my little noggin.
Even that, the crazy part was that it took people out. Like, I just wish I wouldn't have rebuilt. I wish I would have just made the substitution, just swapped him for Christian McCaffrey and just pretended everything else was the same. Because that's what you needed to do. You needed to leave the 10 and 12K on the table to win it all last week. You could have just ignored his price being so cheap. And that was part of what I think people ran into. And everybody goes, well, Debo is the real running back anyway. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that, like, he's not going to get touches. I mean, that just means that whoever the backup ended up being didn't end up getting any touches, which is what it was. I just sort of ran through like some of my exposures. This is not right though, because it's missing some people. I don't understand how it got here. No, I'm just on the Bills side. That's why. All right. That's just sort of what I ended up with. Like, this is the flex. I have 94% Allen between the flex and the thing. So yeah, I guess I've got a lineup or two without him where I've got Cook and then we had a question earlier about the backup running back for Buffalo. The issue I have is, do we feel that's a better situation? But maybe the fact that everyone's going the other route means that we can go ahead and play a little bit of Ray Davis. Everyone, if they're going to spend cheap, they're going to spend on the Dolphins. So maybe in some A-chain captain lineups, maybe you play Ray Davis instead of, the Jeff Wilson or something, right? I think it's logical.
And see, like, usually if you're doing that, you're taking a pivot off of, I don't even know if Ford is still on the freaking Browns, but like, just the first thing that I thought of is like when you're playing the secondary guy, it's because you're fading Chubb to play, Ford or whatever.
Well, me and Rody have a very different take on that. We love to double stack the running backs in the showdown slate, especially the Thursday after Thursday after Sundays, because it's a short week and you tend to get a lot more work out of the backup running back, but you're still going to, on a national televised game, get your running back the ball. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was using that situation here because like Chubb would be, 65% owned or whatever. Like, he's, a great play or whatever. Like, Cook's like 33% owned. Like, I don't even see a reason why to like fade that ownership or like get under that. Like, that's right where it should be. Like, one out of every 3 lines having Cook. I don't think you need to take the unnecessary risk of, I'm going to, not play Cook and play, the secondary guy on that when like Cook isn't even that owned anyway.
Well, what do you think about this idea? How about what if look at your captain is Josh Allen, you have Cook in the flex, and you have Wilson already in. Then you play Davis as your other cheapie, and you play Tyreek with either Waddle, Tua. You play A-Chain in that lineup as well. You could do it. You could afford it.
Yeah.
If you play the Ray Davis, and by the way, Ray Davis will be on the field. It's not a question that he's going to probably have, at least 3 or 4 fantasy points, somewhere around that range. He can catch balls out of the backfield. You never know. It's a Thursday after a Sunday, but maybe they do slow down a little bit with Cook and they let Ray Davis get a few more snaps. He played a pretty decent amount of snaps. He had 3 carries and 1 catch last week. But I think the upside's so much higher, especially considering A-Chain's normal role. It's not like this Jeff Wilson play is not or whether it's Wilson, and maybe it does become a 3-headed monster type of thing, or all 3 running backs play. But whether it's Wilson or Wright, I think
that's what you need for either of those guys to work out. I didn't mean to jump in, but like I fully envision this being a 3 workhorse type of game.
It has to be to some. I mean, also like A-Chain is not. No matter what, he's not going to be out there carrying the ball 20 times. That's just not going to happen. So I mean, maybe 20 would be the cap of where he would carry the ball. I just don't see them giving it to him more than that. Why would you mess with it on a Thursday after a Sunday for a guy who's banged up on the first week of the season when your problem was health at the playoff, by the time the playoffs came around last year, and he already got banged up the first year? Like, I don't know. If it was me, I think you'd be careful with him. I think they will be careful with him. And I think you will see some of these, some of the Wright and some of the Wilson. The one I hadn't thought about as much before, it was mentioned earlier in our chat, was the Ray Davis. And I think that is an interesting pivot, but you have to have a very specific type of idea in mind for that to work. Anyway. I mean, my right is probably a little bit thin, but I like speculating on 4th round is not a nothing thing in the NFL. A 4th round pick is a real thing. That's a guy especially if you take a skill position guy who's a running back, that means you believe in something. So this guy's going to get like some looks at some point this season. I'm not sure this might be the game. So I do want to speculate and be way overweight the Jalen Wright, be way overweight Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson at 30% in the flex to me is just hilariously low.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was saying like the two Miami cheaper running backs, because I don't think you play Achan in this anyway. Like I have not mentioned him once. I just think that's a
Oh, I'm
situation,
playing him too.
you know.
I'm double running back. I just told you I love the double running
No,
back.
but I mean, I was saying like my interest from like a point per dollar
Yeah.
play. Like I don't think Achan is gonna be one of the more likely guys to work out today, from that. Just because I think we probably see like a 40, what is that, 40 35 35 split or something in snaps for these guys.
Mhm.
So I think like Achan's probably going to, if he's doing well, it's probably because he's doing more in the receiving game. um I mean he had 7 targets last week, but there's a real chance Achan's probably going to get at least 5 here, probably 9 or 8 carries on the ground. But Wright and Wilson are probably going to at least get 8 carries themselves on the ground and stuff. And so like when you start looking at that and you look at the pricing, um I think that's why, at least for me, it goes back to the two cheaper guys on the bottom are pretty much identical. It's just coming down to if you need the 400 from Wright, or Wilson, um, and you got to chase Allen and Tyreek due to how this slate is priced out.
Mhm.
Um, and yet again, I just don't think you need. I don't think you need the kickers. I don't really see, because like realistically, we're probably gonna have. I think Allen probably throws 2 touchdowns, and I don't think they go to Cook, or either one of them
It
goes
could
to
go to
Cook.
Cook.
I mean, it could, but in terms of receivers, like the optimal is probably going to have a Buffalo wide receiver in it, and I'm using Kincaid as this too. But I think one of the Buffalo wide receivers is going to be optimal today, um, due to catching just whatever touchdown is needed there.
Mhm.
Because Waddle and Tyree can get there on yards alone, targets on yards alone. Like that's their thing to gain optimal. If they score a touchdown, that's just better. But um, filling out the rest of the lineup, like the touchdowns from Buffalo are going to be needed. And if Allen throws any of those, that guy by default goes in the optimal lineup today. So I try and figure that out.
Mhm.
As I said, at least, and that's why I just like talk about how I would approach stuff. If I'm, you know, a locking, assuming whatever word people want to say, but if I think Allen, Hill, and Waddle are fighting to be optimal today, how do I land or get to the other one-offs or the other ways to fill that stuff out? As I just said, talking out loud, I think Allen probably throws 2 touchdowns today, whether they win or lose. I think that's the more likely way to determine what other guys are fitting that optimal lineup. And that's the path that I try and want to like do 1v1s or get to that type of stuff. Because I'm already
Yeah.
locking in those 3 guys. That and with the other 3 spaces, that's the question I'm trying to answer for this slate.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that you brought up a lot of good stuff, man. I like all of it. I think that we're going to probably get out of here fairly shortly. I did want to, I understand that argument for the receivers. I just point out that nobody, I think, had more than 35-yard receiving for Buffalo on Sunday, and Josh Allen was the highest scoring quarterback on the slate. So I don't think you necessarily need to pair him with a receiver. I think you could play him with the running back. I think you could play him with a defense on a certain type of thing. I think there's a lot of builds that you can get to that are. I think he's the easiest play. But I don't think don't get me wrong. I like the idea of pairing the receivers, but I think all the receivers are being too low owned. I think the narrative drives a lot of these ownership things, and there's some things we don't know about. I already mentioned the one about the Miami, about the right play over Wilson. It's possible. It's on the table. I also thought Wilson would end up like 70% owned at least in the flex. The fact that he's not getting much ownership in the flex or as a captain is just kind of weird to me.
Yeah,
And I'm guessing it's going to be higher than this.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a fun slate. I do agree with the initial thing that you said though too. 2 is the least I feel I need to have, and if I had him, I think I might. That might be I want a captain because randomly he scrambles for 1 touchdown in that one. You know what I mean, or something like that. But in general, I think I'd rather. I feel very comfortable playing Tyreek and Waddle with the backup running back and just counting on them getting the points, and 2 ends up with a couple touchdowns or a few touchdowns even, and still it's going to mostly be the receivers who are the ones producing.
Yeah, I want to mention this really fast. Like how, I mean, this might sound like ignorant stuff, but like how often do like Miami score touchdowns like from the receivers? Like they normally do it through the ground. Like, they'll gain all the yards during the drive through Tyreek and Waddle and stuff, and then they'll end it on the ground. That's another reason why I'm not a
Didn't
big fan.
Tyreek have, wasn't he second I think he was second in touchdowns last year. And I think Waddle was somewhere in the top 15 or 20. So they have to, I mean, they're definitely getting some through the air. You know what I mean? Like, but
yeah, I mean, when it,
but in general, you're right. But they also score more than most teams do. So they've scored a number of different ways. We've seen the A-Chain stuff. We've seen Mostert led the league. A-Chain was like 4th in the league in rushing touchdowns. But also Tua hit him a few times for touchdowns. We saw Tyreek with a bunch. Tyreek's he's a total freak of human nature. He's always going to be scoring. But I hear what you're saying. Let me just see. The projections just updated a little bit. I just want to see if anything stands out to me. Sorry, let me just double check.
No, also, while you do that, I just want to thank everybody for getting the channel to 3,000 subscribers. I've been working on that for a while.
Let's go.
I was very happy to see that today.
Let's go. I love it, man. That's awesome. Yeah. Great job by Brandon. Great job by all you guys, mostly for tuning in. We appreciate it. We appreciate the love. We would love it if you guys hit the like button. To answer this R. Fletch question before I get out of here, I like Coleman a little bit better than Shakir, but I like Shakir a little bit also. It's very close for me, but I give Coleman the edge. How about you, Brandon?
Between, say that again?
Between Coleman and Shakir. Shakir will be a little lower.
Who's the slot receiver?
Well, I think that's the problem. I think we still don't know entirely how they're going to use Coleman and Foley. And also the game was so wonky that they played on Sunday. It's really hard to gauge a lot from that. I mean, they looked horrible. They were getting smashed at halftime, and then some of the Arizona turnovers and just weirdness was all over the place. You know?
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at these two guys from a fantasy aspect, take Shakir's touchdown out. I mean, Shakir is scoring probably like 6 points last week. Coleman, he scored 9. If they're probably going to rotate who's in the slot, that probably helps both of them. Because I would, if there's one guy in the slot, I probably don't want to play him against Miami. Mm-hmm. I would probably lean Shakir just because I think that has a higher likelihood of making something happen downfield versus Coleman. But I could just be an idiot on that. Like that. That's my opinion.
You just need to get to know Keon Coleman a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's just literally. I mean, like it's a rookie who's played one game. This is a guy who they believe in, and they're comfortable enough getting letting get rid of Diggs and everything. I also think Diggs was a little bit toxic, and they do love Shakir for what it's worth. They've always loved Shakir. They made him back. They really turned him into having an NFL career. But I'm just going Coleman and betting on. I always am going to take the devil I don't know versus the one I've seen 1,000 times before, because those rookies, and that's how you pay off. I mean, look, I won tournaments very early last year in the season because I was in on the A-Chain thing a little before everybody else was. And after it happened once, everybody's like, "Oh, that's not going to happen again." Well, it happened like 2 out of the next 4 weeks, and he was the highest scoring player on the slate at like 2% ownership. To answer one more question from Jimmy D. Jimmy D. I can't pronounce the whole thing. Jimmy D. Any Curtis Samuel love? I didn't get to him as much as I thought I was going to earlier because I like the other guys better, but it is what it is. So I personally didn't get there. How about you? The price is a little too high for his role, in my opinion. He actually likes quite a bit.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a fan of him straight up. Going back to like my way that I try to approach these things of like doing the 1v1 is because like between Shakir, Coleman, Kincaid, and Samuel, like we have no clue who's gonna like actually perform in this game. Like I like honestly, they would probably all be pretty similarly projected because like one touchdown changes it all. Whoever scores a touchdown between these 4 guys are going to be the optimal play. I don't think it's Samuel. I think he's less likely to do that. So he would probably be my least interesting guy from the Buffalo receiving end.
Right. Well, see, it's funny because if someone asked me who's the most likely to have two touchdowns from the receivers from Buffalo tonight, I would go Kincaid 1. I think I would go Shakir 2nd and Coleman 3rd. But if you ask me who's most likely to score, it's really close between the 3 of them for me.
Yeah. No, I mean that.
It's really close. And Samuel doesn't quite factor in. But look, there is something. He's a professional receiver. He's officially the WR3. We'll see how many sets they run like that. I think they'll run enough to make him viable, but not probably going to make it into many of my lineups personally. All right, it's been a great stuff, guys. Please hit the like button on your way out. Brandon, any other final thoughts for the people before we get out of here?
I don't know. I think we've talked about everything at some point. So, between all the the situations that we talked about, one of those will happen. but
that's a little bit what we got to do. You know what I mean? It's preparing an idea and a way of coming up with it. Sheets has a very different way of looking at it. Rhodey has a different way of looking at it. We all do, but the general thing is for me to tell yourself a story that makes sense and then act on that story. the story that makes the most sense the most often. Combine it, and it's tough. I'm still incorporating using contest sims and things like that because like for football, that wasn't as much of a thing last year. There was the sims for the regular stuff, but not for the actual contests. And I'm still trying to get the hang of it. And as Sheet said on Sunday on week 1, that he thinks the sims are going to be a little bit behind trying to figure this stuff out, which is kind of interesting to me. So I'm trying to figure it out on my own using some of the same logic that Brandon has, and we have some different takes, but it's still using the same type of thinking, right? Like we want to, the idea of locking Wilson in makes sense to me. The idea of playing like 50% in the flex of Wright as a just totally speculative play, if you really felt like gambling, that's a way that goes too. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways you could skin a cat, I guess is my point.
Yeah. I mean, lastly, I think truly my one, true take or what I think on the slate is I would just fade Tua. Like I would not play Tua today.
Okay. All right. I like it. That's a good take. I like that. That's that'll get you different alone because he's going to be owned by the majority of the people. He's actually projected to be the highest owned player in the flex. And I think as captain, what have they got him 4th?
Yeah. Somewhere along those lines.
Yeah. All right. Well, great stuff, Brandon. Hopefully do many more of these throughout the season.
Yeah.
My brain is a little bit fried because go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was like, I should be free every Thursday to do them.
Well, there we go. So we'll be together then every Thursday, and hopefully it's a lucky Thursday for one of you guys, for Brandon or I. Part of the TrueDFS team is all we ask for, a win any tournament. Leave me the million. You guys can win the rest of them. No, good luck to everybody tonight. Brandon, thanks so much, and good luck, guys. We'll see you in the Discord, and hopefully we'll see some